finished the review, just leave me alone.
Oh great, the idiot's back. And this time, he brought a camera.
Welcome back, everybody. It's Ben from the Ben and Bev channel. This week we are excited to bring you a review for Moon Knight's 4th episode, The Tomb. At the end of last week's episode, Steven and Layla were teaming up with Khonshu to turn back the night sky, in hopes that they can see the way the stars were years ago when Ahmet was originally buried. And though they are successful in their mission, it didn't come without its losses, as Khonshu is now imprisoned inside of a shakti by the rest of the Ennead, and Marc/Steven is now left without his powers to deal with the situation at hand. The opening third of the episode is the largest amount of the archaeology/tomb raiding style, Moon Knight style story that we've seen so far, with both Layla and Steven traveling across the desert landscapes through cracks, crevices, and sarcophagi and mazes abound. We have an internal struggle between Marc and Steven, as Steven isn't prepared to be giving up that body to Marc anytime soon, despite the mission ahead really needing that mercenary sensibility. Meanwhile, on the outside, you can tell Layla is really conflicted with Steven having feelings for her, since she herself has grown extremely distant from Marc and extremely distrusting. Their chaotic relationship coming to a head as we're getting the big reveals, both from what they discover in the tomb as well as from Arthur Harrow with his brief conversations with Layla. Just when you think that Steven and Layla are about to make some headway in their relationship, as they're peeling back the layers of confusion and messiness that's come from these two different personalities and the lifestyle that both of them have lived.
The show starts to dive headfirst into the mummy as we enter
a chamber where they prepare the bodies before Egyptian burial,
which, if you're familiar with,
Pleasant.
It's like the pharaoh equivalent of medieval torture chamber. There's a whole bunch of hooks and jars everywhere, and embalm bodies of those that were buried alive with the pharaoh to help him with his passage to the afterlife. Really terrifying place for them to be having this discussion, and without giving away too much, there's a really crazy fantasy element gets brought in at this midway point of the episode. From here on out, we're entering full-blown action-adventure fantasy, and without the presence of Khonshu through the whole episode, it's a very sporadic change into the supernatural. Effective and chilling tension brought to the table as well by directors Benson and Moorehead. Just the way that they're creeping around these various tombs, everything about it is filled with a sense of dread. You're extremely worried for Layla and Steven, even when nothing's going on and they're just trying to discuss the events that have happened. You just want them to move on. You don't want them to stay in these creeping corridors with the wind blowing through, with the desiccated dust of the ancient mummies everywhere. There's also some really cool historical tie-ins right here, whether that's with Alexander the Great, the mythological tie-in at the end with Tawrat. It's not like Eternals or like Thor, where it's kind of similar to mythology. No, straight up, these Egyptian gods are real. So many different levels of hierarchies and powers among them. Seeing them through the Marc/Steven lens makes it even more terrifying.
I never get any predictions right.
At the end of last week's review, I felt they were going to push everything into the Asylum Moon Knight story by the end of this week's episode, and
without giving away too much,
pretty big hints have been laid out here, and we knew we were going to be heading there sooner rather than later, but I think the way that they handled it was extremely shocking to the viewer. I wasn't expecting the transition, and the amount of questions at the end of this week's episode surpasses all of the other ones by 10. Just what they do with the story in this final act is such a nice job of fleshing out the characters. So far, after having some big reveals amongst their relationship, we're now going to throw everything in the blender.
Just leave you salivating for more in a state of confusion.
This week's episode of Moon Knight The Tomb is definitely one of the stronger ones by far. It's a lot more narrative focused, and even though the action sequences were featuring a lot less of the Moon Knight character, I thought the horror and globe-trotting elements really carried this week's episode. And when we finally make that big change in that final act to a more emotional, complex, and mental story, they don't pull any stops. I mean, the last 20 minutes of this episode are almost an entirely different show. Ethan Hawke is just as terrifying as Arthur Harrow this week. In fact, there's a really great conversation between him and Layla about what really went on between her father and Marc, and to what extent of her doubts she really has to fear. Conversation's actually held over a giant pit. Really cool scene here right before everything goes crazy, and the way that ties into the ending of the episode with Layla, Steven, Marc, and Arthur is beyond comprehension at the moment. Oscar Isaac is also great every week. The full duality of the personalities he's doing is on full display this episode, with a good amount of his dialogue being scenes between himself and himself. The fact that he can carry conversation with two different accents and very different character dynamics between two characters within his own head.
Mind-blowing.
Absolutely adore the way this show is ripping us one way and then tearing us the other the next week, not giving you a solid ground of footing for where the story's actually going to be heading. Makes an extremely interesting way to tell an origin story, especially when the narrative can be as muddy as it is, chock full with mythology, shady figures, and whole Ennead of Egyptian gods. My anticipation for next week level is at an all-time high, just as it was the previous week, and I have no idea how they're going to wrap this up in 2 episodes, especially with that left hook they just threw us at the end of this one. Extremely excited to see if Khonshu comes back in the fold, or if we end up staying in this very mental, dark space that we're in right now.
Either way, I'm excited for it.
I love that they appear to have pulled all of the craziness from each volume and version of Moon Knight and kind of added all together to make an utterly unique show that, as a Moon Knight fan, I couldn't be more pleased. What did you guys think about Moon Knight's 4th episode? Are you excited in the new ways it's taking us? Or did it leave you shocked and confused? Let us know in the comments below. We'll see you guys next time. Ben and Bev, out.